All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Bernard, and I'm a bookseller here at Politics and Prose. On behalf of the owners and the staff, I would like to welcome all of you for this evening's event. As you may already know, Politics and Prose hosts hundreds of in person events along with our partnered and supported events, trips, and classes, some of which are being held at our newly relocated branches at Union Market and the Wharf. So please check our website for a full list. Some bit of housekeeping before we start. Please turn off or silence your cell phones so as not to disturb the event. For the Q&A, please remember to step up to the microphone over here by the pillar before asking your question so we can not only hear and enjoy the conversation but also ensure that it is recorded. For those of you who want to buy copies of the book, we are selling them right out front by the registers. We will be doing a signing after the Q&A. So if you'd like to get your book signed, please line up once again by the pillar over here, and we will come by to ask for your name if you want your books personalized. So please have your books ready for us. And lastly, once the event is complete, we ask that you fold up your chairs, lean them against something sturdy to help us out a bit. I'm honored to introduce Joseph Earl Thomas to all of you. Joseph is a writer whose work has appeared or is forthcoming in VQR, N+1, Gulf Coast, The Offing, and the Kenyan Review. He has an MFA in prose from the University of Notre Dame and has finished his doctoral in English at the University of Pennsylvania. An excerpt of his memoir, Sink, won the 2020 Chautauqua Janus Prize, and he has received fellowships from Fulbright, Vona, the Tin House, and Breadloaf. Tonight, he will be talking about his new book, God Bless You, Otis Spunkmeyer. In this accomplished debut novel about Black life, Joseph tells the story of an Iraq War veteran grappling with his return to civilian life while also reckoning with his own personal history. In their review of the book, Publishers Weekly writes, in a remarkable feat of formal invention, Thomas collapses time and space, melding Joey's memories with descriptions of patients in the ER. Thomas scales great heights with his innovative blend of social realism and surrealism. He will be in conversation tonight with Reggie Bailey. Reggie is the co founder, executive producer, and co host of Books Are Pop Culture and the creator of 10 Books, 10 Decades, The Biggest Book Challenge. He is a literary citizen who believes that books should occupy the same space in our cultural lexicon as film, television, music, video games, and fashion. Everyone, let us all welcome Joseph Earl Thomas and Reggie Bailey.
Hello. How are you?
Hey. Thank you for coming out. Definitely, I think we should give Joseph Earl another round of applause. This is Pub Day, so you know, definitely got to celebrate that. Your second book, debut novel, and it's impressive. It is really good. I was about to miss us getting introduced because I was telling him how good it was back there. And I expect that y'all will feel the same way when you read it. And I think a lot of people will feel the same way. So Joseph, I know we were saying you'll do like a little bit of
Yeah,
reading.
yeah. Because it just dropped today. I'll read a little bit from the beginning of it so there's a sense of what the prose sounds like or how it's structured. And I always think of, the beginning of a book as doing some of the work and teaching you how to read it in the first place, no matter what kind of text it is. So I'll just read, a couple short pieces in the beginning. And so I'll include this epigraph in here as well. There's two of them. The first one is by John Keene from Annotations. By choosing and extolling certain models to the exclusion of all others, he sought to deny the impending crisis of his own self-representation. That's from John Keene. And then the other one, so you say you're under a curse? Well, so what? So's the whole damn world. And this is Jigo to Prince Ashitaka and Princess Mononoke. If you know, you know on that one. Of all the level 1 trauma centers in one young, though very old nation, it's this one, on the north side of a northeastern middling city where we wear teal scrubs stained with shit, which, in this context, helps signify the unbearability of true pleasure in the world. Pleasures in feeling purposeful and needed and useful without forcing the disambiguation. The waiting room is full. In the trauma bay, bright lights illuminate the bleached out bloodstains and pennies thrown across the tile floor. A small boy is shot through the thigh again with an AK 47, and next door, a teenage girl from Temple is sexually assaulted. This homeless dude, Greg, who everybody loves to love hate, is beaten to near death outside a gas station by teenagers who are not yet shot through their daddy's deep blue Crown Vics with AK 47s at Sunoco on Broad and Lehigh, or Hess on Shelton Ave, or Exxon by the Home Depot, where I worked in the lawn and garden section, and Hector and them waited outside by the truck for gigs playing ball with every single mom's little kids on that Fisher Price court in front of where Lorenzo and Julia made those banging ass Italian sausages. He started coming here too, Lorenzo, a few years after his first heart attack, back when he could walk in without the oxygen tank in tow. There's one boy who, just last week, strolled in dressed down in all white on his way to a party at Broad and Bad News Champlos, is in need of penicillin again. He's dragged in by a correctional officer. Both of them, him and the officer, a girl I went to high school with rocking late in life barrettes, who every teen and 2 gym teachers call bad, were both coughing up a lung, just backthroat spitting on everybody from the waiting room and through the hallway, from the window to the walls and past the egg white cashier's counter. All together makes me remember that one time she had burnt our point guard and was like, my bad, in public to wild laughter that lasted all year. That same year, Sean Paul and Busta Rhymes forever christened the colloquialism for getting burnt, make it clap. And this, the reclaiming of our 24 points per game averaging Stars pride, would then take a back seat to a more historically salient reenactment, because too soon after, this white girl at an away game ran around asking everybody on the court and in the bleachers if she could give them head, and, despite our best efforts, he gave in. Needy. What an obvious mistake. After which she informed her boyfriend down court that our point guard had raped her, thus vanishing our sports star into the system like my younger brother after he slapped the taste out of his teacher's mouth for choking him one Wednesday afternoon because he was 3 minutes late to his 10th grade social studies class. They both left behind kids and girlfriends, one of whom, Tasha, is a nurse manager now. On her way out the door after a long night shift, reminding me that my scrubs are fucking high waters, bro. And I remind her to mind her fucking business, and she says, I love you too, and I say that's why I'm not watching your badass kids no more. One of whom, when sleeping over, jumped from the top bunk into the ceiling fan at 2:43 a.m., cracking his head open and complaining afterwards about his almost, but not quite ascension into Miles Morales. But she got a new boyfriend now, who's apparently always dreamed of being a stay-at-home dad type nigga, who I discovered only recently in our last text thread. A video of him, tall, fine, brown, in Reebok slides and every nigga deserves sweater, playing Fallout with the kids in her living room, while she sat back, rolling a blunt just outside on the patio. Hummingbirds gathered around her hanging feeders in a scene that, if coupled with the right soundtrack, would have made me cry. I'll stop right there.
I didn't want the mic to fall. So Joseph, I like to ask this, right? Because I think it's important, especially. Well, I'm just curious, so that's why I don't have to do a big thing. So last year you put out a memoir, right? Your debut memoir. This year is your debut novel. So I'm curious, what have been, if any, like some major differences between publishing a debut novel versus a debut memoir?
Yeah, I mean, when you say that right away, I'm like, one of the things is external. So I think, and you probably can tell this too, people tend to care more about novels than memoir or nonfiction in general, right? It's like when a novel drops, there's more emotional investment, it seems, either from people or from institutions, let's say, right? Whereas the kind of memoir or nonfiction holds this kind of place in our culture that's not as vital, even though, right, like African American literature comes from slave narrative, right, which is one of the earliest forms of American literature in general, right? So it's always been important in that scope, but I think in the kind of contemporary world, we don't give nonfiction or memoir the same amount of attention. And I also think that we give it less critical attention to than we do to novels, because I think somewhere in the back of a lot of our minds, it's like there's no craft, or there's, I mean, that's a harsh way to put it. There's not as much, perhaps, in the way people look at it, craft going into a memoir or pre-conscious thought as there is into a novel for whatever reason, which I don't think is true, of course.
Yeah, because like for example with memoir, right? I noticed this year in particular. So there's like this website. I don't know if y'all familiar with it, bookmarks.reviews, which is basically like Rotten Tomatoes for books, right? And I noticed like a memoir, like a couple memoirs this year, got like fiction type of press when it comes to getting reviewed by the
Mm-hmm.
publications and stuff like that. I think of Knife. I think of what Splinters,
Okay.
right? Both of
Yeah.
those. So what you said really resonated just now about how usually a nonfiction book, if you go on that website, you'll see like 3, 4 reviews.
Mm-hmm.
Or the novel, you might get like 13, 14 if you Sally Rooney, who knows? So yeah, that's real. And what else
It
do I
depends
want
on
to
who
say?
it is too, right?
Yeah,
So like you talking about known people
yeah,
who had already, they dropped hits prior to the thing. So that matters a lot,
yeah.
right?
No, it really does. It really does. And I'll ask you this too,
Yeah, yeah.
because I think your answer to this could change every day, if not every hour.
I thought you were about
So
to say could change everything. I'm like, damn,
yeah.
what is okay.
So what is now, right? Because I know I asked you this last year for the pod, but I ask you that again this year. What is the most important lesson you've learned about the business of books?
um okay. I mean, I'm thinking with regards to this one, that I or not just I, um, but that I think most of the advice that comes out publicly is not really about the book, and it's about marketing, which are like really different things, you know. But it's necessary if you want to kind of make it to figure. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before, right? It's like you have to do a lot of self marketing, learn how to market yourself, learn how to sell the product. The product is different from you technically, but you are the product too when when you start publishing. And so uh, I think I've learned not to have really high expectations for public discourse that I used to have before I ever published a book.
And talk a little bit more about that, right? So public discourse, like what
Mm-hmm.
what did you expect that to look like versus
Yeah, I
what
guess.
does it look like? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this isn't to say that it's all. So I went to this thing not too long ago. It was like a lot of folks were like Claudia Rankin, Saidiya Hartman. A lot of those folks. There was like a 1 day like symposium in New York that was really good, with a lot of different kind of interesting work and stuff going on. So that's like a good example of going to an event and I'm like, damn, this is actually really exciting, or it's like helping me think about things differently, etc. Right? Or you get to see a lot of people that you actually fuck with. I think I used to get up and be like, I can't miss a single event or thing that anybody says ever. Like before I had published a book, and I use all of my energy running back and forth. I would be like cooking dinner, and instead of listening to music like I normally would, I would have like the talk on or whatever. I needed to know everything that anybody ever said under all circumstances. But then after a while, I was like, actually, a lot of this is the same exact thing. And on one end, a lot of it is like learning that people need to be cautious because it's actually not safe for everybody to say everything. On another end, and then learning, oh, okay, like this is the list of things that one is supposed to say. And then I kind of just like started to chill a little bit. So now I'm like, all right, well, I might not make this one, or I might not make the next one, but I do try to like keep up as much as I can.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. That was dope because I kind of used to feel the same way. Like you had to catch everything. If you say you're into this author or you're gonna do research before you have a conversation with them, you have to see every conversation they've ever done, right? But it's like that almost what that does actually is make you recreate the same event that's been happening
Yeah,
over and
yeah, yeah,
over again.
exactly, exactly. And then we're all recreating the same shit in either in the work or in public or whatever. I will say, there's certain places though too that you can go to. I mean, when I think of when I want to, read interviews with people or something like that, I think a lot of those like Bomb magazine interviews or like Creative Independent, a lot of those are really good. And I'm like, damn, this is actually really unexpected. Some of the stuff that people are saying on there.
I like it. I like it. And now to kind of get into the book a little bit, right? So, um, when God bless you, Otis Spunkmeyer, was introduced, right? I'm someone who likes the backlist, right? And I realized, oh, this is a another version, right, as far
Mhm.
as the title goes, of God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, which is a Kurt Vonnegut novel that came out 1965. Some consider like a precursor to Slaughterhouse Five. And I want you to talk a little bit about just titling your novel "God
Yeah.
Bless You, Otis Spunkmeyer" and evoking Kurt Vonnegut. And you know, was that a book that had like a significant impact on you, and you wanted to kind of write to it?
Hmm.
And also just talk about like some of the themes that maybe you're continuing from 1965.
Right, right, right. Yeah. No, that's okay. So that's a good question. And when you said that at first, I immediately was like, I'm technically not going that hard because I was thinking about Vincent Cunningham's book, which is literally called Great Expectations, right? Like you can go harder if you wanna if you wanna invoke something prior. But I think for me it was a lot of things. So I did have back when I was struggling to graduate from community college, failing classes at community college, and I didn't really know how to get involved in reading and writing. I thought it was all too difficult for me, and all that stuff. I would take it as my task to like somebody would mention a book or author that they really liked or whatever, and I'd be like, all right, I need to read everything that this. Oh, similar to the other problem, right? It's like, all right, my education wasn't that good. Somebody brought this up. I need to read everything that's ever been written by a person, and one of those people was Kurt Vonnegut because people kept bringing up Kurt Vonnegut in class. I had a teacher that did, and I was in the army with some dude, one of the few people who did read and was also reading, I think, Slaughterhouse Five. I think Galapagos is my favorite one of those books. But I think part of what I was interested in with them was the kind of irreverence that they had, especially about violence, which felt like at least it felt to me, right? So a lot of them I haven't read in a long time, but it felt like there was an automatic assumption that things were pretty fucked up all the time. There's a consistent background of this. There was other, of course, many, many problems with it. I think it was too irreverent at times, and it didn't allow you to change moods. A lot of the novels, right? You stay in one mode. This is one of my problems with a lot of satire in general and stuff like that. But that was something that I could get invested in, and I couldn't really get invested in some of the other stuff that people were telling me to read at the time. That was very much, individual character goes through a particular singular hardship. The book is about resolving that particular hardship, usually in 3 acts. It's resolution comes at the end with a kind of amelioration of like the family or what have you, versus like some of the Vonnegut stuff where the world is just done now, right? The world has literally ended. And it reminded me. So one of my favorite books that's newer compared to like the Vonnegut stuff is Matt Johnson's book Pym. It reminds me of like that kind of ending.
Yeah, no, and it was wild. So, the audio version of the book came out, and it differs a little bit from the copy I have. And in the copy I have, it doesn't say Chris from Pim,
Mhm.
but in the audio, it said it, and I was like, hold on, I was like, you referencing
Yeah,
Pim, and that was a really cool like reference in the
yeah,
book. And I also wanted to talk about this too, because your structure, right? The way it's like stream of consciousness is like really fast paced to me. Like
hmm,
the book is, and I don't want to say that to discourage anybody, right? It's still obviously very good, very readable, but it's like a fast paced narrative. And I was wondering if you could speak to like where that comes from, and just do you think, especially based on like Joey's life, him being just really busy, like, and we're going to talk more about that, but just exceedingly busy, right? Was that, was the structure of your work like a way to really immerse us in that busyness?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like um, I'm trying to figure out like how you describe the the present world, which is like, to me, right? One of the primary things that feels true is that more and more of us are expected to be at work all the fucking time. Like, so, you know, not even in my lifetime, when 15, 20 years ago, you could have one job and live in an apartment. That's not true now, for
Not
most
unless you
people
work
in
in
most cities.
OT.
Right. Not unless you work at, 75, 80 hours a week or whatever. And I was trying to think about like when that started to happen. I was maybe like 17-ish or whatever. I was like, why is it mandatory for everybody to work? And so I don't really know anybody who isn't also working 70, 80 hours a week, but who also has to deal with larger abstractions about the world, right? With which are the kind of abstractions, one of identity, of kind of like global geopolitical conflicts, and then try to square that with the fact that you're supposed to be at work, or you don't have nowhere to live, right? Or your family don't have nowhere to live. And I was like, how do you get prose that is trying to synthesize that instead of just saying, "Did you know?" Because I really don't like the kind of "did you know" attitude of a lot of um, uh, 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 kind of critical suggestion. That's like, if I just tell everybody what I know is true, then that's gonna change people's minds. It has to be like more subtle than that. And so I was thinking about like what are the things that interrupt thought, or like how you're thinking, or things you want to do are interrupted. And it's not that, for example, the protagonist doesn't want to grieve Ray, the friend. Is just like, you don't have time. Not everybody has time to do that, right? So whenever, a lot of times when someone I know dies, it's not that we don't want to grieve them. It's just that like somebody has to pay for the funeral. um Not everybody's gonna have life insurance, so I'm trying to be like less sentimental and more real about that kind of stuff, rather than being like, this is how we resolve it emotionally, when the problems haven't ended. They're actually getting a lot worse, I think, to my mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, so much of what you said is true, because I was so I was like adjacent to I guess a important death, right?
Hmm.
And I was seeing how the said family, like, in the midst of grieving, they also kind of had to shut it down a little bit, because they're like, okay, we got to handle business. We have to get all our affairs in order, right? And even in the line of work that I do, it's like, yeah, people are grieving months later, but they're also calling in and they're like, well, hey, I've been working on getting these affairs in order for months, right? Months. So yeah, it's yeah, what you said really resonates there. So something else that stands out about Otis Spunkmeyer is war zones.
Yeah.
Whether it is the actual war zone when the U.S. military is in Iraq, right, or whether it is the war zone of life when you see the injuries that people come into the trauma center with throughout the work, and perhaps the biggest war zone of them all, according to Joey, family court, right? And I wanted you to talk a bit about these various war zones, right? And just what the work you wanted them to do throughout Otis Spunkmeyer, and why Joey suggests that family court is the harshest of all war zones.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really want to get the kind of emotional relation of that there. So the first thing that I would say about that is, one of the other things that I think defines and I should say, right, I'm 35, so I was born in 88. One of the other things that I think defines our era is that there hasn't really been a time that we've been alive where there hasn't been a kind of global conflict in which the United States is playing some part, right? In which like empire is not doing its work. I mean, the one that we see like most prominently right now, right, is the war on Gaza, to include all of the kind of censorship that's going on in the United States and the kind of extremity and scale as things are like ramping up. Um, and right, and even again, right, since 48, like all the way until now, this is like a kind of amplification of what has already been happening. And I think that it's hard to write about that. Whenever sometimes I'll be reading something or talking to someone, and that kind of stuff can never come. It just doesn't come up at all. But it's hard for me to imagine it not coming up. And so, one of the other things that distinguishes this era is that almost, half the people I knew or was close to, played ball with or whatever, in high school, a lot of them joined the military because, right, it's like you either work 80 hours a week at whatever other usually deeply fucked up place, you join the military, you can at least get health insurance for $237 a month, which is like a quarter of what I pay for health insurance now for a family. I mean, there's a lot of kind of push and pull in this. Of course, there's a lot of people who judge those folks who can't afford anything else but to go to the military, which is interesting for a lot of reasons. I'm using the kind of family court example as one because that's one of the places where all these abstractions about what a family is, what you are supposed to do, right? Particularly if you're a black man in the 21st century, right? Like we are supposed to be recuperating things from our forebears who, at anyone who's kind of read anything can imagine, the things that you read are not good. Put it like that, right? Right. What you hear is not good. And one of the ways that I think a lot of us try to do that is to kind of overperform, not just at work, but also with regards to family and caretaking. And what happens when you actually do that, but legally you are not allowed, or it backfires on you, right? Because those particular formations of power have not changed very much at all. And so I'm trying to, create a situation in which like, oh, that does feel the worst because it's a situation where you feel like you should have some kind of power. Everything externally is telling you that this is what's most important in addition to doing all the other labor stuff. And then you fail not because you have quote unquote done something wrong, but because of who you are. Right.
Yeah, no, that's deep there. And you led me to another question that I actually just thought of on the fly, right? Because you talked about the military, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Due to the war zones, and I know I asked about it. But one thing that I really appreciate, being someone who is a military brat, is the depiction of like black folks in the military, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why is because sometimes when it comes to any of this stuff, whether it's like military or like, policing, whatever, we have a tendency to think that someone joined this because they believed in the America Project, right? They, like my dad, and dad, if you see this, I love you. Like, I don't think I've ever even heard him say the words colonialism, imperialism, anything.
Yeah.
He just wanted to take care of his family, and that was the lane that he chose to
Right.
do that. And I feel like your characters like symbolize that to me when I think of the platoon that's over in Iraq. I think it was like 11 black folks in it,
Yeah.
and there was like one guy who kind of was like hype about like the America Project a little bit, but everyone else just went to work. And can you kind of just talk about that a little bit and why it was important to show that side of us when it comes to our relationship to the work that we do?
Yeah. I think about that a lot, man. So, I don't know that many people um, in my personal life, say before I became a writer, who went to college. And that means everybody is working whatever jobs they could get. And some people in the military, you know how many, like, look, so bad. You know how many black folks I know who are prison guards? They're not like, I love prisons, I want to be, like not a single. However, like they're willing to work those jobs rather than be out on the streets in a lot of cases. And I think that's it's interesting to me because that's a hard thing to try and work through or to take people serious in, because I think oftentimes in like intellectual spaces we kind of just dismiss those folks, right? And be like, oh, they could have did the same thing we did. Like, why didn't they go to college and become a professor? I'm like, well, you know, obvious, but that was really important to me to try and work through. Not to say that there's some kind of like nobility or whatever in it, but it's also to say there's not really nobility in many of the fucking jobs that we do, regardless of whether you have a doctorate or you don't. You know, there's like, look, I think sometimes we can get caught up in thinking that our relationships to power are more pure because we have a more socially sanctified job or career, even if that job or career makes you just as neglectful or violent as the people who you would judge for working at this other job, who actually have a lot less power or acumen than you do. And I want to be able to kind of split that difference, because I think that we sometimes are doing a thing where we're not even going to think about those folks at all. And it's hard for me to do that because that's where I live in both of those kind of worlds, you know?
Yeah, no, that it's true. Like, you know, some people will say, you know, like we're in DC, right? Oh, I have a government job, and it's like, oh, you just have a government job. But when
Yeah.
someone says they work in the military, it's like, oh, you know, they get side eyed, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, another person works for the government. What, you know, is
Yeah.
it that
I mean, it's more
different?
cushy if you in data science or you're a linguist or you pilot drones or you make the, you know, I mean, it's like very interesting how if you, in ways you have more power, you're able to be more steadfast and illusory about what it is you actually do in relation to other people's lives in ways that other folks kind of can't, that you see on the street or whatever, right?
Exactly. And another thing I really like about your work is Joey's relationship to his dad, right? Especially in relation to um, how he would be viewed by the public, right?
Yeah.
So basically, Joey's dad committed statutory rape to conceive Joey, right?
Hmm.
And in the book, Ray dismisses him by saying, "Oh, so he's like R. Kelly, right?" And you know, it's safe to say, I think most people probably would just say that, right? And just kind of like, oh, well, he's where he needs to be. You know, that's all he
Right.
deserves. Just be labeled R. Kelly, whatever, right? But Joey takes a road that I feel is less traveled because he isn't quite ready to throw away the key on his dad, right? But it's also not to make it sound like, I guess, too pure, right? Because Joey is also trying to like get published. He's working on a dissertation,
Yeah.
right?
Also hates him, right? Like hates, yeah.
You know, and it's but he doesn't just like throw him away, and he does. There is this thing in Joey where it makes me think of a quote from Brian Stevenson, you know, Just Mercy, author of Just Mercy, lawyer extraordinaire, all that, where he says people are better than their worst mistake, right? And I want you to talk about this idea of like people being better than their worst mistake, and maybe also just Joey trying to make sure that if someone profits off his pain, it's him
Right, right,
as
right. Yeah.
opposed to whoever.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all horribly, horribly fucked up, right? There's no way around. And I think that that's what I really wanted to do with this book. It's like, there's no way. I think one way that we deal with these kind of things, you just remove yourself from it altogether. And I think what I'm like, okay, well, what happens when you can't just remove yourself, when you are the one to be made responsible to some extent? And so, right, so the father figure in the book is in a prison where they're running experiments on prisoners. So it's Holmesburg prison in Philadelphia, which is a prison where skin experiments especially were run on mostly black prisoners for years and years. It's closed down now, but in the book, it's actually open still. So there's a kind of doubling thing happen. So there's lots of folks who are coming in who are family members from that situation who have also done fucked up things in their lives. And so the needle that's being threaded is like, okay, do they come to the hospital and the protagonist then treat them horribly like a lot of the other staff does? Uh, or is it being taken seriously that they are already in a horrible situation? Um, uh, of imprisonment and being experimented on is the kind of question that's lingering around. And the protagonist is essentially one of those people who is also kind of horrible in himself, because he's like, okay, well, if somebody is going to make money off of talking about this situation, it so decides that he's going to write about the father, and that is the only reason for seeking also hates the father, but says like, this is what I'll do. I'll interview, speak to, and then ultimately write about the father. And I think ends up being just as horrible. And this is the sense on like where you work in the line of production. If it's like at the very bottom, you are doing what we would consider like menial work, or if you're creating knowledge or something, you work in knowledge production. In this case, the person working in knowledge production who is like knowingly kind of devious,
But see, I want to push back a tad
Yeah.
bit, right? Because there's a good chance that if Joey didn't write about his dad,
Oh, yeah.
right, someone would have, and that someone
Mhm.
more than likely would have been like white, like we're gonna keep it real,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, why not him?
Yeah.
Why? How come he has to be horrible to do that?
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the thing. It's like, I mean, okay, so one of the broader questions I'm asking, right, is like,
Yeah.
are there very many things you can do within this particular world system that are not horrible?
Yeah.
Is one of the questions that I would say to that. And I mean, my pensive answer is like, not really, but of course there are degrees. And I think it is true that somebody else would be the person to like produce knowledge off of that scene figure, make money off of it, and kind of going about their merry way.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And sorry, I got caught up in
No,
that.
no, no.
So I want to talk about the role of stories in the work,
Yeah.
though. Still, not only that, but to me, what's interesting is at the trauma center, right? People come with their stories, which is like their records,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you think of just Joey not only trying to do like the dissertation, right, the academia, or the academic storytelling, but also like the commercial. He has a literary agent
Yeah.
and everything. And I just wanted you to talk about just the various stories being told in your work, and maybe how like these medical stories are ultimately in connection to the stories that Joey wants to tell commercially and
Mm-hmm.
academically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm marking time, so maybe we'll have time for folks to ask questions in audience if they have them after this one too. But you know, there is a way. Of course, okay. So the first way to think that I always come to thinking about that is kind of old school racist anthropology, right? Which is like to kind of generate uh, races of people, places as differentiated species or something based on the needs of empire, some version of that, right? Which a lot of early literature was also literally that exact thing. Um, so there's a worry from the perspective of the protagonist that is also what's being done, but it's also there's like an emotional resonance and something that feels true or real, speaking to so many of the people that one might be closer to than your like colleagues at work or whatever, which I still feel a lot of the times. I'm like, when I go home and talk to folks, I do feel much more comfortable, let's say, than when I'm talking to folks at work or something like that. Um, the other thing is, there's a knowing setup or a field of expectation around that stuff too, where we kind of know right away, like, oh, this would make a good story, or if I just change this word or this other word, like this would make a good story. And part of how the novel works, it takes place during one shift in the hospital, the whole book, and every time a different person comes in, there's a set of memory or relations to that person that sometimes erupt into stories, sometimes don't, and then you get pulled back in by the work that needs to be done in real time, to give context to what you were saying. And I think that is something that one could see as kind of marketable right away, or kind of immediately, right? And the question that I stay with is like, okay, well, what do you do with that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'll let people ask questions maybe after this or after a couple,
Oh yeah,
right?
I mean,
But
yeah. So if folks have something,
so I want to talk about pleasure now,
yeah.
right? Um, Otis Spunkmeyer, right? Which I was calling it Otis Spunkmeyer for the longest. I don't know why. I think that's called the Mandela effect, I think. So, but Otis Spunkmeyer takes a lot of space in the work, right? Whether it's the cookies or the muffins, they tend to be like breaths of fresh air,
Yeah.
right? And sighs of relief, which is interesting when you consider what I suggested earlier about this being like a very fast-paced book.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, you get to get your win for a quick second. It's like a timeout, right? The timeout will include an Otis Spunkmeyer muffin or Otis Spunkmeyer muffin or cookie. And I wanted you to talk about just sighs of relief and pleasure, and not
Yeah.
just necessarily with Otis Spunkmeyer. There's plenty of like sex in the work and talk about sex, right? Or just watching stuff online in the privacy of your room, or what you thought was the privacy of your room until someone walked in on you. I think y'all know where I'm going with that. So could
Right.
you
Right.
just talk about Otis Spunkmeyer and just the role that you wanted pleasure to play throughout the work, because it does take a lot of space in there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's so. I'm glad you asked that, right? Because it can seem like everything is just falling apart, and it's all horrible, which is true. It's not untrue, but I think also at the same time, this is a thing that seems to me incredibly true as well, which is that as everything is falling apart, there are these moments where you do feel or experience pleasure, um, and the tricky thing is sometimes those ways that you experience or feel pleasure are also horrible to other people or to yourself. And then you have to come to learn to deal with that, which doesn't mean eradicating it altogether because that's not possible as an individual. That's that weird, like, neoliberal shit where it's like, it's all about your mindset. You just have to recover. I'm like, you don't recover the world as an individual. One needs help. But you know, it was important to me to try and have those moments as closely tied together as possible, so that the thinking in them moves through pretty smoothly, right? So it's like, yeah, things are horrible. You can get maybe like a frozen muffin. Uh, as I mean, they're really also a symbol of the kind of prepackaged shit that a lot of us have to eat because we don't have time to sit down and cook anything else, right? So it tastes really good. Feels usually really horrible a little bit after you've eaten it, etc. Like we know we've seen a Lunchable before, or some other kind of stuff like that. So that's what they symbolize, and that's what I'm trying to do with it as well, right? And some of the sex as pleasure stuff too is like, in this context, it's trying to reach out for those moments with people, and it's not like a big relationship blow up disaster, but people are just like, all right, that was nice, like let's get back to what we were supposed to be doing, kind of thing, which isn't the kind of hyper romantic cis het relationship situation that we're supposed to imagine it to be, but it is nonetheless pleasurable for the folks involved in those situations.
Yeah, nah, it was and it's interesting too, because when you like coming up, they always tell you like don't crap where you eat. And
Right, right,
it's
right. Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, tell the people in Otis Spunkmeyer about that. And also, while we're talking about pleasure, what's the deal with Belize? Like Belize was like the
Yeah,
destination
yeah.
in the
So
book, right? That was so interesting to me. Like, could you just talk about just Belize as this vacation spot, or maybe an expatriation spot, or whatever it was,
yeah, yeah, it could
whatever
be
you kind of
expatriation
teasing
spot.
out?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the emotional relationship. If anybody's ever seen a screensaver, so if you're a person who works 80 hours a week, right? And you open up your computer and on the screensaver is like those beautiful white sand beaches, people swimming with whale sharks and shit like that, like this incredible scenery, these rainforests that are all mostly gone now. And that kind of stuff. These locales, some of which don't exist anymore, of course, live really grand in one's imagination, especially compared to a landscape of every other day you're seeing three or four at least people get shot, or you go outside and your primary focus is not the scenery but like watching your back, right? So a place like that might seem, especially if you've never been there, you don't know anything about it, right? All you see is the images, and you know that people who have a little more freedom than you are willing to, drop their whole overtime paycheck on childcare and whatever else in order to go for a couple days. That can be something to look forward to. It can get you through a long shift. Being like, if I get these couple more hours, we were talking about this a little bit too, right? How you get caught up in the trap. If I work 20 hours of overtime this week, this summer I'll be able to do X, right? I'll be able to go to Jamaica, for example, Treasure Beach, or as kind of example of that from that I was at last summer. So I wanted to be like, what is it when you put those places in the mind, but there's so many of us kind of never getting there. And I worked with a lot of people who are always plotting on the next vacation. Like, I'm going to work 40 more hours. I'm going to go here, et cetera, et cetera. Never do it, right?
Yeah, no, and to even like kind of piggyback on the overtime thing you were saying, right? Even like on a personal scale, recently I was thinking, I was like, okay, instead of doing 72-hour weeks, I'll do 60. But then I was like, okay, 60 is a little bit too much of a decrease, so maybe I'll do 65 or
Yeah.
66 since I need time to myself. But I'm wondering if I'm just gonna continue doing.
It's
70.
never gonna come. The time to yourself is never gonna happen.
Yeah,
It's done.
yeah. Well, yeah. I guess I'll open that. On that note, I'll open it up for questions. If not, I'll continue asking them because I got a few.
Yeah.
You mentioned Matt Johnson earlier.
Yeah.
Why do you, and I'm not an English doctorate, so maybe it's all out there and I don't know about it, but why do you feel like feels so uncommon for people who write about really horrible situations to add levity into it, to do that tone switch?
Maybe not that I think it's uncommon to add levity. I think the challenge is to have both the kind of horror and the pleasure be quotidian at the same time, and not to have one or the other serve as a pivot in the book or structure of the book itself. If in my case, I'm thinking about how do I attempt to like recreate reality as best I can, and for me that is mostly what it's like, right? Like, you feel pleasure, the horror, you remember the thing. It's time to go to bed. Now I've remembered every horrible thing that I've ever done or said to anyone, and everything that anybody has done horribly to me. It's 3 a.m., haven't slept, next day, wake up, repeat, go to work, etc. That kind of thing. I'm trying to recreate that. So it's not that I think it's uncommon to have both of those things, but I tend to be drawn to work where both of those things are kind of quotidian. They're both every day.
Well, since I'm up here, you mentioned reality. Both of your books, your memoir and this book, are like pretty drawn. They're personal.
Yeah.
Is it weird to have strangers think they know things about your life?
No, I mean, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I always say one of the things that's interesting about being Black is that strangers always think they know things about your life, because everyone's a junior ethnographer when it comes to the Black experience. And that's one thing. And then the other thing is that to me, I have, 10% of what I think of as my life or my psyche or something in the books themselves. Maybe when I get to like book 30, 40, if I live long enough, then I'll be like, okay, if one has gone through all of those, then maybe, yeah, like you probably know something about me, but I don't, I haven't really seen it that way, I think. And that's because you're still going through a set of conscious decisions about what you decide to say, when and under what circumstances. And there's a lot of play involved as well, too.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions.
Yeah. Well,
I feel like there's somebody. Okay, maybe somebody else didn't have my. Oh yeah. Go. Yeah.
I will.
I want to go back to Reggie's first question, which you answered from a marketing perspective, but from a craft perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Just the decision to make the first book memoir and then this one novel.
Yeah. A couple of reasons. So I did start writing some of this before I wrote Sync. The main reason I would say is because I knew that people were dying and I wanted the nonfiction to be out and to be as kind of upfront, direct about that. So like Sync, the first book is structured based on, it's in the third and second person, based primarily on the fact of how other people see you as a character, the figure. So it's not really, like my memory and my interior thoughts. It's like me interviewing, speaking to my family members, and constructing a self based on what they said. And in order to do that, they had to be alive, right? They had to be alive, and I didn't want to wait until they were gone and then just say a bunch of like kind of buck wild, hyper confident things with my chest while no one was there to say anything back to me. And basically it's because since I knew that people were dying or would die really soon, or would no longer be able to speak to me, I wanted to be like, okay, this is the book that needs to come first, basically. So I guess it's less of a craft, but still more of a personal one. Right. I could have, but I think that I wanted to be as intensive as possible with the imprint of saying that, okay, this is nonfiction, and to push the boundaries of what was allowable or tolerable within the way we think of that genre as like already established. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In part because I thought it was funny. That was one reason. The other one was that I didn't want to get to part of it immediately. I thought, okay, to what extent can I talk about people's medical histories or what have you? So I was already going to have to fabricate. So much of the book is just told as people's, like basically medical histories. So I would have had to fabricate a lot of that. The other thing that I wanted to do was to think about this place in Philadelphia that just took up a large swath of my own imagination, but doesn't necessarily get talked about as much in fiction, which is Holmesburg Prison. I mean, so like Greater Northeast Philadelphia is on one end used to be a semi-bougie suburb, or at least that's how I looked at it when I was younger. But there's all these prisons up there. So like when I was younger, people would call it State Road. And I wanted to re-invite Holmesburg as a place being alive again, because that's the way that it existed in my own actual memory, even though there's not a ton of kind of fictionalized when you read books about Philadelphia, that doesn't really come up at all, or that area of the city doesn't even come up at all. And so I wanted to do as much work with that as I could.
No, and I love that question, right? Because you said something, and I was thinking this when I was reading it. I was like, it's interesting because chronologically, Sync comes. So first off, Sync, as we established, is memoir.
Yeah.
And Otis Spunkmeyer is a novel. So technically, right, they're not even on the same like universe, I suppose, right? But it's interesting to me because although Otis Spunkmeyer would take place later than presumably Sync, chronologically, right? It read like a prequel to Sync.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in part because of the part where Joey is around his family and he's recording them,
right?
Which is what you were talking to or speaking about. And I wanted to know, although they're not necessarily in the same universe because of genre, do you look at Otis Spunkmeyer as like a spiritual prequel to Sync?
I wanted that that resonance to be that's the part that I mean, like that I thought was funny.
Okay.
That it could be that kind of like spiritual prequel or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think of it as being that, because I think of it as having like fundamentally different perspective, or asking different questions, but like about a community which would see, right, like if the character Joey or any other characters in Sync were to come in as a patient in this hospital, it would not be weird at all. It would fit in the structure. And I think that I am trying to build a broader scope of thinking about the lives, like seriously thinking about the lives of like a lot of non-working poor Black folks, and engaging in like kind of discourses with folks across that spectrum.
Got it. Okay. Well, I guess I'll squeeze in one more if PNP will let me. So loneliness stood out in a big way to me with Otis Spunkmeyer, and it intrigued me too because when I think of loneliness, I tend to think of it in more of like a literal sense. Like
Yeah.
maybe when you go home, it's just you, and you spend most of your time at home, and you're lonely, right? It's just you. You have no pets, just you and whatever you have in your house, right?
No pets.
But no nothing, no pets, no partner, no anything, and barely any food. And when I look at Joey, I just feel like there's always people around.
Yeah.
There's his coworkers at the hospital or the trauma center. There's uh his platoon when he's in the military. There's his family members, right? There are his children, right? And even he plays games, right? And
Yeah.
just the expansive world of gaming, right? I feel like there's always people around, yet when he speaks with his mom, you know, they basically talk about how everybody's lonely, right?
Yeah.
And again, in my mind, I'm like, Joey's always around somebody. How is he lonely? And you encouraged me to think of loneliness in a different way, right? And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about like the work you want to do around loneliness and showing that it can still exist within you, even though it to the untrained eye, it might look like you couldn't be lonely.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like much worse when you are that person who's always surrounded by people, but you're incredibly lonely all the time. I mean, there's different, I also think, right, different types, a kind of like intellectual loneliness, spiritual loneliness, et cetera, so on and so forth. And that, I think that that's really just true, right? There are, part of the difficulty is splitting the difference between really different types of people in your life. So, and one of the ways I put it, like the people that I play ball with are not always the same people that I play video games with, are not always the same people that I talk about books with, are not always. And some of that is just healthy, right? Like you have wide networks or groups of people that you share things with, and they are not all the same person, right? Like it probably should be that way, essentially. But I think that sometimes you can feel lonely if you, especially if you have obligations to people that, not just money, but that's like one of the bigger ones in this book, but caretaking obligations to people such that you spend an excessive amount of time with them. They can share everything with you, but you can never share everything with them. And how do you feel with that being one of your main modes of relating to other people, right? Which is that you have to kind of, not close yourself off, but it's just not going to land, right? Like everything bounces back, but you receive everything from the other people all the time, and that's kind of what I'm getting, and that feels very, very lonely. This is why, like, you can't really be friends with your kids, right? Like they need you too much for you to just be their friend, so you have to enforce at a certain point certain kinds of boundary. Even though my kids do be thinking that we just regular friends and doing whatever, I'm like, at a certain point, it's time to go to bed. No, you can't eat that. Yes, we can play this. We can ride bikes, not all day and night, but you know what I mean. So it would be like having your children as your only friend, or having people who depend on you so intensely be the only intimacy that you have, and it feels really bad.
Hey, there it is.
I mean, that sounds
hey, no.